To complete Project 3, access the documentation for the project on the website. And I'm just going to show you how to complete the summary table and form the portfolio and complete the dominance graph. But to complete the summary table, highlight the table in the Word document. And essentially what I did is just put my cursor on one of the cells in the table, and that adds this little box with a plus sign in it. In the upper left corner, if you click that, it selects the entire table, and then I just Control C to copy it. I will pop over to my project in Excel, and this part you can't see where my cursor is, but I'm creating a new tab, just a blank sheet in my project spreadsheet, and I'm going to paste it with Control V. I'm going to widen that first column and then highlight all my rows and just double click, put my cursor on one of the lines that separates the rows over here until it turns into that odd plus sign with the arrows, and I will double click, and that automatically adjusts the row height of all the selected rows. Then I'm just going to enlarge it so y'all can see it a bit better. I will change the word tickers to the tickers of my specific stocks. And then I've got the portfolio, which I'll show you how to form momentarily, the S&P 500, and then my fund is Vice X. The Vice Investors Fund, it invests in cigarettes, alcohol, defense companies, and gambling companies. Then just enter a yes or a no as to whether or not the company paid any dividends at all during the 2 years that you've been tracking it. And I just happen to know that the answers for mine. You will need to look them up. What I have over here, this is my Starbucks tab. I have my monthly returns. This is essentially Project 2. You have the monthly returns, your date, adjusted close, and dividends for your 5 stocks, and the market and the fund. Eventually I'm going to want to calculate geometric means. To do that, I need to add a column over here with return relatives. Return relatives are just 1 plus the return. And then I can click that cell, double click the this little black box has a name. I think it's called the drag handle. If you double click that, it will drag the formula all the way to the bottom. Unfortunately, though, it thinks I want a value for the return relative for December of 2010, the first month in our 2-year period, but I don't, so make sure you delete that value. Now I can just copy this entire column and go to my other companies and the fund and just Control V and paste it in cell E1. And since I made everything relative, it is calculating the return relatives perfectly. First, I'll demonstrate the calculation for Starbucks arithmetic mean monthly. The function is the average function, and I highlight, so I press equal sign, type in average, and open parentheses. Then I click over to my Starbucks tab, and I highlight Starbucks monthly returns. Make those absolute, which I did by pressing F4, and then close your parentheses and press enter. So Starbucks monthly return was almost 4%. Now I want Starbucks mean, geometric mean monthly. So I will use the geomean function. So I will start that function, type it in, click over to Starbucks tab, and highlight the return relatives. press F4 to make that absolute, close my parentheses, and then subtract 1. And it always does this for me. It just adds a huge number of decimal places, which I don't want. So I am going to shorten that to just 2 decimals. And I'm checking to make certain that the geometric mean is lower than the arithmetic, or equal to each other. Now I want the holding period return for the very first year. So we, in this example, bought the stocks December of 2010, held them for 2 years, but I want just the first year's return. So we bought them, pretending we bought them in 2010 of December, and sold them exactly a year later, so December of 2011. So just looking at Starbucks, I bought them for $23.50, sold them a year later for $36.42, and didn't get any dividends that first time period, that first year. But I want my formula to be robust enough to adjust for dividends when I copy it to another company. So I'm going to add dividends into my equation. It'll just enter values of 0 for Starbucks. So start my formula, and I'm going to do the holding period return for Starbucks first year. So it would be the December 2011 price plus any dividends I would, make that absolute, plus any dividends that I would have received during that year. So highlight the first year's worth of dividends, make that absolute, then subtract the purchase price, which would be the first month's price of $23.50, make that absolute, and then divide by the purchase price, make that absolute. This is a percentage, so format it as such and carry it out to 2 decimals. Now I want the return for only the second year. So in this case, from December of 2011 to December of 2012. So start my equation, pop over to Starbucks. It would be the selling price of $56.03, make that absolute, plus any dividends that I would have received that second year, which would be, in this case, from December to January, I'll just say from January of 2012 through December of 2012. Make that absolute. Subtract the purchase price from December of 2011. Make that absolute. And divide by the purchase price of December of 2011, making that absolute as well. Again, format it as a percentage, carrying it out to 2 decimals. Now I want the entire holding period return for the 2 years. So essentially I'm saying, hey, my price with Starbucks went from $23.50 all the way up to $56.03, and I got these few dividends. So what return is that? So start your equation with the equal sign. It would be my ending price of $56.03 absolute, plus the sum of all the dividends, absolute, minus the December 2010 purchase price, absolute, divided by the December 2010 purchase price, absolute. Formatted as a percentage out to 2 decimals. Now I want these 2 returns I just highlighted in yellow are the 1 year holding period returns for the first year and the second year. I want the arithmetic mean of those 2 yellow returns. So I would just highlight average, or input average and highlight those 2 yellow returns. I'm not making these absolute. If I'm referring to a different tab, I'm making those references absolute. But if I'm referring to a number within this summary table tab, I'm making it relative. I also want the geometric mean of the two yellow returns, but remember in Excel I have to calculate the return relatives and then highlight the return relatives. So I'm just going to go below my summary table and create the return relatives for the two yellow returns by just adding one to each of them. And so this would be my return relative for the first year and my return relative for the second year. Now I can use the geomean function on those two return relatives. So geomean, and highlight the two return relatives I just calculated. Make them relative references, not absolute. Oh, and I did something a lot of students forget. When you use the geomean function, you must subtract 1 at the end. And then just shorten it to 2 decimals. Now this is a fairly rare occurrence where out to just 2 decimals my geometric mean and my arithmetic mean on the annual basis are equal. If I carry both of these out to more decimals, you can tell that they do differ and that the annual arithmetic mean is higher than the geometric, which is normally what happens. The reason these two means are so very close is because there's not much deviation in these two yellow annual returns. My guess is for my other stocks there will be quite a bit of difference between the two annual returns, so I would see a bigger difference between the arithmetic and geometric means. To calculate the sample monthly standard deviation, we just use the built-in standard deviation function in Excel, stdev. Pop over to your monthly returns for your stock, highlight the monthly returns, make it absolute, and close your parentheses. Format it as a percentage out to 2 decimals. Starbucks is actually a really good example to demonstrate this with. Now I want to calculate the annual standard deviation. If I calculate the standard deviation for the two yellow annual returns, it's going to be very low. Again, it's a percentage, so I'm going to format it as such. And you can see it's nearly 0% because there's not much deviation between these two numbers relative to their arithmetic mean, which we knew was going to be the case because the annual and arithmetic and geometric means were nearly identical, which means there's not much deviation from the numbers used to calculate the means. This is not an accurate picture of how risky Starbucks really is. So rather than calculating the annual standard deviation using the two one-year returns, what I'm going to do instead is take the monthly standard deviation and annualize it, which you might think you do by taking the monthly standard deviation and multiplying by 12, but you actually take the monthly standard deviation and you multiply by the square root of 12. So here is a more accurate depiction of how risky Starbucks really is. I'll show you how to calculate the ending weights in a bit, and if a cell has been colored black, then leave it blank. Now, before I copy this, I want to just do a quick verification. Any cell that refers to another tab, that reference should be absolute. So I'm just looking to make sure that, because these refer to the Starbucks tab, and right now I'm in my summary table tab, I need to make this reference right here absolute. The same for every reference that refers to a different tab. And I'm just going to quickly check all of them. I'm just verifying that each cell is absolute, except essentially for my rows, the annual geometric mean and arithmetic mean, and the annual standard deviation. those should be relative references. So everything looks good. I am going to highlight the cells with the formulas in them and copy them across. Because I used absolute references, all my numbers are referring to Starbucks, whereas in column C, I actually want them to refer to Crocs. So what I'm going to do is just highlight the formulas in Crocs column, click on the Home ribbon, and find and select, click Replace, and I will tell it to find the name of my Starbucks tab, which is SBUX, and replace it with the name of my Crocs tab, which is CROX. Replace all, and if you've done things correctly, it should find 15 replacements. So I will, and your numbers should have changed to reflect Crocs's value. I don't even need to close this dialog box. I can just highlight the next column, my Ruger column. I still want it to find Starbucks. This time, though, I want it to replace it with the name of my Ruger tab, RGR. Again, it should find 15 replacements. Switch to my Weight Watchers column, change the ticker. The same for Netflix. So you can see it doesn't actually take too long to complete your entire table. You just have to make sure you spell the name of your tab correctly. I haven't actually created my portfolio tab. I should have done that first. I will create a portfolio tab though, and when I create it, I'll name it portfolio. I was wondering if that would happen. It's not actually liking that because I don't have a tab named that, so I'm just going to skip that for now and highlight my S&P 500 one, which I have called Market. Is the name of my tab. And then the name of my Vice X fund, I've called that tab Fund. So now what I have to do is create a portfolio tab, and then I'll come back here and edit my summary table. You might actually want to create your portfolio tab first, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm creating a new tab, and right now I think my cursor's just off the screen, but I'm creating a new tab and I'm calling it Portfolio. So I can use most of the information I already have and just copy it. I want to copy my headers. So copy my headers. I want to copy my dates. Oops, I don't really want to copy the word date again. And this isn't going to be the adjusted close price. It's going to be the monthly portfolio value. So essentially, I'm saying that in December of 2010, I gave you I gave you $50,000, and I asked you to invest $10,000 each in 5 different stocks. The value that will go in this month will be the value of each of your stocks times the number of shares that you own of each of them. The value for November will be the value of each of your stocks in November times the number of shares that you own, all summed. So I'm just going to, you could choose the first month, December 12, or the last month, December 10. Doesn't really matter which one you start with. But I'm going to start with December of 2010. And what I'm going to do is take the number of shares I own of each stock times the price of each stock. Right now I don't know how many shares I will own of each stock, so I need to calculate that. I am going to always put this calculation in the same cell for each of my stocks. So for Starbucks, I have $10,000 that I'm investing in it, and Starbucks cost $23.50. So I could purchase 425.53 shares. I'm going to copy that and then pop over to A28 for my second stock and just paste that formula. Same for my third stock, fourth stock, and fifth stock. And you can see because Netflix was a little more expensive, perhaps a lot more expensive than Starbucks, I couldn't afford nearly as many shares with my $10,000. For my portfolio now, I know how many shares I own of each stock, and I know what each of them cost or was valued at in December of 2010. So, popping over to Starbucks, well, first I am, I'm going to just start over. Starting my formula, equal with the parentheses. Popping over to my first stock, multiplying by the number of shares, which will stay constant each month, so I'm going to make it an absolute, times the price, which I will leave relative. So when I copy this formula up to the next month in my portfolio tab, it will take the number of shares times the next month's price. Close the parentheses and then do my second stock, number of shares absolute times the December of 2010 price relative. My third stock, number of shares absolute times my December 2010 price relative. My fourth stock, number of shares absolute, times the December 2010 price relative. And then my fifth stock, number of shares absolute times the price of 2010 relative. Just giving it a quick glance to make sure I always did my number of shares at an absolute, with an absolute reference, and the prices with a relative reference. Because this equaled 50,000, which is how much we started with that first month, I know my formula is correct. So I'm going to format it as the $ out to 2 decimals, and I'm going to carry it up. So my portfolio went from $50,000 to $137,000. This formula takes the number of shares of each stock times the current price of each stock. Number of shares is absolute, so if I copied the formulas in column B to column C, it would still reference the number of shares. The price is relative, so if I copy the formula from column B into column C, it will reference whatever column C is in my individual stock tabs. Column C is the dividend column. For each stock, even stocks that didn't pay a dividend, I left column C blank for this reason. Because what I can do is just copy this formula over, and it will take the number of shares of each stock times the dividend if they paid one. If they didn't pay one, it just multiplies the number of shares by 0, giving me a value of 0 for that stock for that month. Make certain you do not have a dividend value in December of 2010, the first month. The monthly returns, the process is the same process as you used for all of your individual stocks. So what I can do is just pop over to an individual stock, highlight these formulas, copy them, pop over to my portfolio, put my cursor in the first month's monthly return cell, and paste it. Double check it. Make sure it takes the current month's portfolio value plus the dividends minus the previous month's portfolio value, divides all that by the previous month's portfolio value. And return relatives are just 1 plus the monthly return. So now my portfolio information is complete. I can pop back over to my summary table, highlight my portfolio section, and do Home, find and select, replace, and find portfolio, or sorry, find my ticker symbol, which was Starbucks, and replace with portfolio. And it's giving me an error message on this one because I messed it up. I'm just going to recopy that formula and replace just this formula with replace Netflix with portfolio. Whoa, that's not quite right. So I'm gonna hit close and escape. I have really messed something up. I wonder if I can just hit undo. Yes. I'm going to highlight it like that and hit find and select replace Netflix with portfolio. And I believe that will fix it. I will double check that. The reason I am getting these numerical errors for the geometric mean, it's because I haven't yet calculated the return relatives for any of my investments except Starbucks. So I'm just going to drag these return relatives over, and it has, well, it's basically the numbers are just too large to display, so I will highlight them and widen my columns. Oh, it's just carrying them out to too many decimals, so I will reduce the number of decimals and make it look good. Because there's a huge difference in the two annual or yellow returns for Crocs, there's a much bigger difference between the geometric and arithmetic means on an annual basis for Crocs than there is for Starbucks, because Starbucks returns were quite similar from year to year. Probably a huge difference with Weight Watchers too, because there's a huge difference in the first year's return compared to the second. And you can see there's a big difference in the annual arithmetic versus geometric mean. Always double check things to make sure they make sense. I'm not going to spend the time doing that right now. To calculate the simple weighted standard deviation, I drug cell B10 or B12 over, and it also carried my formatting over, but originally when you copied this cell, I believe it looked like this. Only, oops. Oh, ignore all that. It looked like this, only these 5 cells were green. These are the annual standard deviations for my 5 stocks, the 5 stocks that make up the portfolio. The 34.61 is the correct standard deviation of my portfolio, and that's really interesting. I haven't yet actually lectured about this in class, but I will, and explain why it's happening in detail. But if you look at my 5 stocks, 4 of them have standard deviations that are quite a bit higher than the actual standard deviation of the portfolio. Only one has a standard deviation that's lower than the standard deviation of my portfolio. The reason that's true is because these 5 stocks have fairly low correlations or co-movements. This 34.61 accurately considers those co-movements. What I want you to do is assume the co-movements are all 1, and assume that each stock maintains its 20% weight every month, which is not true. If it were true, though, the standard deviation of my portfolio would be an average of each stock standard deviation. So I want you to calculate that number. Just average the 5 green values. So if my stocks had perfect +1 co-movement, and if they maintained the 20% weight every single month, the actual standard deviation of my portfolio would be nearly 52%. In reality, it's only 35%, which tells me that I've got relatively low co-movements for the 5 stocks, and that's good. The last thing you need to calculate to complete your summary table is the ending weight. Each stock started with $10,000 of a $50,000 portfolio, which is 20%. But each stock didn't end that way. To calculate the ending weights, you'll actually do that on the data sheet for the project, and I have the instructions on that data sheet, but I will just quickly show you how to calculate your ending weights. So I'm just going to put my ticker symbols up here to keep things straight for you. And then I'm going to pop the number of shares for each one up here. Oops, I forget to put that equal sign sometimes. And then I'm also going to pop the ending price for each of my stocks. So number of shares here, ending price. So the price the last month of the 2-year period. So in this case, December 2012. Oops. Now I want to find the total value of my portfolio. I can do that by taking the number of shares that I own of each stock times the ending price. Copy that down, and then I can sum it. I get 136,920.5, which is the same value over here for December 2012 of the portfolio. If you don't get the same value, you've got a mistake somewhere. To calculate the ending weights, I would take the value for the first stock and divide by the total value of the portfolio. I want that total value of the portfolio to be an absolute reference because that will always be my divisor. Format it as a percentage out to 2 decimals and copy that down to get the weights for each of my stocks. Ruger, if I look here, Ruger was my best performer at 109.07%, so its weight should be the highest. Netflix was my worst performer, so its weight should be the lowest. It was my worst performer even though it earned nearly 25% a year on a geometric mean basis. My wealth changed at a rate of 25% a year. So best performer should have the highest weight, worst performer should have the lowest weight. And that is what I see over here. So take these weights, copy them, pop over to your summary table, and do a paste special values, and in my case transpose because they were vertical on when I copied them, and I want to paste them horizontally. And again, format them as a percentage out to 2 decimals. So there's my ending weight for each stock. To calculate your dominance graph, I am going to do this in a separate tab. What we want to do is plot the annual arithmetic mean for everything. So I'm going to copy that and do a paste special values transpose. I also want to copy the annual sample standard deviation for everything. I am going to paste special values and transpose again. I am pasting the standard deviation to the left of the arithmetic mean because I want to do an XY scatter plot in a moment, and it will always take the leftmost column and make that your X. I want my X to be the risk, so I have to make it the leftmost column. I also want the ticker symbols, so I'm just going to copy those and transpose them. Format them nicely as percentages, and now insert a scatter plot with only markers. I don't actually need this legend, so I'm just clicking the legend itself and I'm deleting it. I do want a title. I can't remember how to do it. So it's under Layout, Chart Title, and this is a dominance graph. Label your X and Y axes. So this is my standard, this is my annual standard deviation. And then this is my annual arithmetic mean. There is no quick, easy way that I'm aware of to put the ticker symbol beside each dot. It would be lovely if I could just say, use column A for my ticker symbols, but I haven't figured out how to do that. So what I can do though is select my dots, say add data labels, and just manually type in each ticker. So adding the data labels lets me, gives me something to edit. It also pops the return up here so I can see which one goes to which. So the 85.42 belongs to Netflix. The 103 or 109.37 belongs to Ruger. 5506 belongs to Starbucks. So make sure you replace those numbers with the ticker for everything. I'm not going to finish it, but you should. And then just circle the dominant stocks or dominant assets. It might not be a stock that's dominant. It could be the portfolio or the market or your fund even. So Starbucks, for instance, is dominant. So what I'm going to do is insert a circle and just circle Starbucks and format it to have no, actually no fill. And you can leave the line blue if you want. And I'll just know that your circled stocks are your dominant ones. There are more dominant ones than just Starbucks. I'm just not going to circle them all.